Hi, everybody. Fuck intro. So let's just get into it. So I like to use rather than depend upon institutionalized learning. Like, if you want to learn how to draw art, like, don't just, like, if you're going to use something, you can read it, you can get what you want out of it. To depend on something means that you're just going to be um, fully following it to the letter. It becomes the gospel and you never stray from it. No questions asked. And you just allow the thing to take over your brain. So, and when I talk about institutionalized learning, I mean, it comes from schools, it comes from textbooks, it comes from what other people say. Oh, this is what you should do. Loomis, Loomis, Loomis. That is institutionalized learning. The reason why I say it's for me, the definition of institutionalized means this is the official orthodox way to do it. And, there's just everybody has come together and agreed upon it, and therefore that makes it institutional. It becomes instituted. It is the only way and the way to do it. And so I don't use institutionalization in art. The opposite of doing institutionalized, or I would say the opposite of institutionalization is individualism, perhaps, individualizing things. It means to do things yourself, it's like, I would say, is it about being unique? No. It is more about finding your own identity. Like, it's when I say that it's not about just being unique, because being unique just means, well, I'm going to be unlike anyone else. And usually what happens is whenever people do that, they just try to be edgy, and then they make like the original. They make, original the character, do not steal. That's what happens when people try to be unique. And I would say, no, try to be, yourself. Try to be yourself. Try to find your own identity and figure out, what do you stand for? What are the things that you like? What interests you? What's your point of view on a thing? And this is a hard thing. There's very few people who have a firm grasp on their own individuality and their own identity and personality. They're trying. So often people just try to be zany as opposed to actually finding their own personality. And I think maybe one of the reasons for this is that often when you reveal to other people, about your true self, I think people naturally like to hide this from others because there's a vulnerability in that, in letting people know what you're really into. If you really let people know what your fetishes are or what your interests are, they may come along and deride you for it. And so, yeah, it's a hard thing to find your own. I think some people do such a good job at hiding their true selves from other people because they're afraid of being shamed for it. You may get shamed when you're trying to be in a collective. I think that it's kind of normal in a lot of tribes and collective situations that anybody who strays too far from the group tends to get shamed or tends to get ostracized in some way or another. So finding yourself and being able to, when it comes to art, you should be willing to express yourself, despite the ostracism that you may face. Or it's like your identity is this. Well, this is a kind of a Jordan Peterson thing where it's like an interactive game. It's not just defined only by you, but it's also defined kind of, you're partly shaped by the people around you and how they think about you. So really finding where it is that where do you, at what part does the crowd end and you begin, right? So, where do you meet the crowd, and how much of your behavior is you and how much of it is other people. And so I think you can only follow the crowd so much. You can only try and cram yourself into the mold of others, into the mold of institution before, I think the more that you do that, the more you cease to exist. And by the more you cease to exist, the more the individual things, the I won't say quirks. I don't like to use that word quirk. I don't like to use those. I just say the things that are very distinct to you, the things that distinguish you from other people. And again, it's not about trying to be I'm different, you know. I'm different. It's not that. It's identification, you know. It's like your fingerprint. And I think a lot of people are so good at hiding their fingerprint from other people because there's safety in that, right? Is that the less distinguishable you are from other people, the less you can be targeted, I suppose. It's like it's the zebra. It's the zebra strategy, right? I think people are very used to when you go through school, which is an institutionalized society. When you go through the institutionalized society of school, I mean, I think you very rapidly, most people will rapidly learn to adopt the zebra mindset, the zebra strategy of just blending in with the crowds and being a lot like other people and trying to be like others. Like I say, it's not all bad, because if you never try to, if you don't conform at all and you're too individualized, you run up against society, and it makes life harder for you sometimes. But then I think if you're going to advance anything and do anything different, if you're going to do anything to change anything, you've got to be different. There are things about you that are different, and perhaps there are things about you that are different and good, or different and better, or at least different in you. And fully institutionalizing your learning, I mean, God, it's like it's so hard going through something like school and then learning how to figure things out for yourself, because schools are always trying to clone people. They're trying to clone. And what I mean by cloning, it's just they're going to try and imprint you with a specific way of doing things. They're going to try and imprint you with instructions, like your own DNA, your cellular DNA are cellular instructions. They tell the cell how to do this and that, and everyone has different DNA, and there are cellular apparati that read that DNA and carry out those things, right? That's what makes us us, right? Is the DNA. There's some things in there us that are vital and common amongst all of us, but there are some things that make us different. And societies can't evolve if we're all acting identically. And whenever you have large, I won't just say societies, but I would say large collectives that are identical, they all share the same weaknesses and they can all be wiped out by the same thing. So, I mean, when you have monoclonal agriculture, right? It's like, yeah, sometimes you get famines that wipe them out when some disease that comes along that can exploit a particular weakness. So and oftentimes when it comes to computers, right? Computers are very often all manufactured the same way, and they have OSs that are all the same way, and they all running the same software, and they have the same weaknesses. And so when some 0-day exploit comes out, it tends to wipe out large amounts of computers all at once. So I think institutionalization tends to give people individualized instructions and tends to clone them. And so you share weaknesses. I suppose you share strengths. But I would say, you can use institutionalized knowledge to try and pick out a few things that you as an individual would deem are worthwhile to the way that you want to approach art. But, you don't have, and I would advise against fully drowning yourself in that. Like, learning is not about like, you can't learn drawing simply by through the transference of knowledge. Like, maybe Neo or Trinity can have the instructions for an attack chopper or a transport chopper downloaded into her head, and then she can fly this transport chopper. But it doesn't. You still need, like, experience counts for a lot, and we're not precise machines. We're not precise robots. But what we have that robots don't have is the ability to adapt and the ability to improvise and to kind of wing it. And I think some of the best art, really I think a lot of, the best art is done improvisationally. It means that you figure, oh, the art's kind of going this way, but I want it to go that way, so let's make some changes and let's change the way that we approach things and gradually steer it this way and that. It's like I like to equate drawing to driving, because I think driving is a very complex task. You can't, like, it's a drawing is a process, and if you there's process versus instructions. Instructions, when I program computers, I can expect that the computer will carry out my instructions exactly to the letter. It will do no more and no less. It is entirely predictable, and upon successive iterations of running the thing, I can expect the same results. Yes, there are random, pseudo-random number generators. We call them pseudo-random because they're not truly random. And you can't learn how to draw through instructions. Otherwise, I would have programmed the computers, programmers would have programmed the computers to draw for us a long time ago. And so drawing can't be learned simply by instructions alone. There's instead a process, right? So the difference between instructions and process is that instructions are fixed and they're unchanging and they're meant to be followed exactly. That's program code. Instructions are code. Process, on the other hand, is like a series of goals. If you want to make a drawing, then there may be certain waypoints along the way, but how you get between those waypoints is indeterminate, shifting, changing. And when you want to draw a pretty picture, you might not know exactly what that picture is going to look. How you don't know its exact appearance. You might not know all of the details that are in there. And so it's a series of goals, but you've got to improvise and get from one point to the next. And so there may be a structural phase. You might have a bunch of your ideas kind of floating around in your head, and they're not nailed down yet. Drawing is the process of nailing these things down. But even then, we can't just say, okay, well, we're going to take that thing of my idea and bang, nail it down. We'll take that idea and bang, nail it down. Instead, it's like, no, we got to take our thoughts and we have to kind of gather them into this loose netting. I think the imagination for me is like a school of chaotic fish. They're all going around this way and that. Sometimes there's a bit of a flow to it. But I have to essentially freeze the fish because drawings are frozen. And so I have to take those fish and I need to kind of put a net around it and then gradually tighten the net down. This is what structuring is that we figure things out spatially. We want to figure out, I don't draw things. I draw the space they take up, right? Like I won't draw, that line and then, that line and that line and that line of an object. I think, well, how big is the thing? It's roughly, I'll draw an encapsulation of something that's about the same size, because that excludes all this line stuff. I can spatially perceive and kind of feel it out, and I can say, okay, it's about this big, and maybe it's oriented this way or that way. I can steer it around and make adjustments. So I that's the loose netting, and you draw the fish into the netting, and you gradually shrink wrap the whole thing, and then you think, okay, well, I guess this handle or spout, kind of, we can make a netting around that and gradually figure that out. And where is that thing juxtaposed relative to the main mass of the object? And then every single detail, you're just gradually trying to close the dragnet. And, by the time you're done, you'll have something that looks fairly detailed. And the interesting thing is that it's like if you take some guy's face and you plow it into some, I don't know, soft, maybe not jello, but a clay, and you a molding clay, and then you pull it out like plaster of Paris, right? So you push him in there and then pull him out. He leaves behind an impression. And so when you're drawing, whenever I draw, my way of approaching art is I create the spatial impression of an object. I don't draw the thing itself. I draw the space that it would leave behind. Right? But that is something that's not exact. And there's a lot of there's a lot of wiggle room in between, and there's experience that comes into play. And then I have certain things, like if I'm drawing people, I have certain bits of anatomy like ears and eyes and heads, and some of those things are on speed dial in my head. I can already imagine how they are from the different angles. That's what the practice is for. The practice is to kind of memorize those things. But even though I have maybe a head on speed dial, I can still change. I can elongate it, or I can squish it, or I can maybe shift the eyes around in my mind. It's like having a character editor in a video game, and in my mind I can kind of, make my adjustments to the face. And so I have the rough overall structure that has been, I've ingrained that in my head. But things like the placement of the features as well as the proportions of the head are all adjustable. And so you can't follow a rigid set of code for that. It's just never going to work. Never happens. So, what I'm trying to say is, don't rely on, don't, don't depend upon all the diagrams. And there's tremendous amounts of information and tutorials out there, but don't go feeling like you have to watch hour-long videos from start to finish. I think it's counterproductive. I think what you can do is you can fast forward to different segments and look for the important parts. Look for the important key moments within a 1-hour tutorial and figure out, which bits of that are really useful. Those are the things that you must really, really capture. And same thing with books. You should. People ramble all the time, like me. And same deal is that there's a lot of chaff. There's a lot of chaff in between. And so you've got to be able to skim through and find the really important bits of information and skip through the rest. And the stuff that you skip through, some of that science, what it means is that when you glean important bits of information, you have to figure out how to tie those things together. You may receive conflicting pieces of compelling information, compelling for different reasons. Sometimes it's as simple as this one's better than that one, and we can throw, sometimes it's in this situation, this one is better, and in that situation, that one's better. Or, they may not be mutually exclusive. Maybe I can find a way to make it where they both harmonize and synergize and work together. So not everything is monodimensional. Some things are one-dimensional. Some things are two-dimensional. Some things are three-dimensional. I think people have difficulty with multi-dimensional, n-dimensional thinking, right? Because, we say one-dimensional, two-dimensional, three-dimensional, four-dimensional, five-dimensional, right? There's multi-dimension. That's why I call it n-dimensional thinking. So one-dimensional thinking is just to say, well, how good or bad is something, right? And then you might have three-dimensional thinking. We got water in this thing, right? Now, if we were thinking if you want to figure out how much water is in this, the quantity of water is measured by, if you're in America, it's ounces or fluid ounces. Canada or rest of the world with metric system, these are milliliters. Now there's less of it. So knowing how much water there is in this is a volumetric quantification. Because if you had the height of the water, you have, well, in this case, this thing, if you had the radius. Now the thing about the radius is the radius goes all the way around. In this case, this is a cylinder. If it was a cube, it was like a box-like shape, then you gotta have height and width and depth, right? So if you wanted to find the volume of a box-like object, you need height, width, and depth. So if you took, let's say it was 3 by 5 by 0, okay, how much water would you have? Well, unfortunately, one of those dimensions is 0, right? So if you take height times width times depth, and you've got 3 times 5 times 0, the result is 0, right? It's because all 3 dimensions matter, right? On the other hand, if your depth starts to scale up, then if your depth is 1, then 3 times 5 times 1, well, 3 times 5 is 15 times 1 is 15. That's an example of 3-dimensional thinking, right? Is that if you're going to calculate how much water is in here with a box-like vessel, you need to know all 3 dimensions. And sometimes when people look at when they try to solve problems, they think, oh, I need to be better at this thing. I need to improve that other thing. And I've gotten so better in this particular dimension. I've gotten so much better at that particular thing. My line work quality has become way better. I've become so much better at drawing circles. And maybe, you know, I can draw really good curves, but all my drawings still look like shit. Why? It's because the goodness of the drawing is a volumetric quality. Maybe you don't have any spatial ability, spatial placement, or maybe you do. And so you've got great line work quality. You've got great curve. You can draw great curves. You got, you know, you can draw, you know, really good spatially. All right. But then it still looks all because structurally you need the structure. Right. And maybe you didn't place things according and, you know, to where they should be, and you didn't kind of plan things out. And so it looks like a 3-dimensional convincing monstrosity rather than the cute waifu you were trying to draw. And this is what I mean. It's like you need that n-dimensional thinking. And if you're wondering why it is you're not getting results, sometimes I think that people tend to focus on the wrong things. They don't know what is the dimension they're missing. And again, you can have great structure and you can have great line work and great spatial sensing. That's not all. There's still more. There's still knowing, you know, what turns you on and turns you off, especially if you want to draw horror and like awesome looking creatures and shit. Sometimes you need to draw things that are unpleasant to you. Some people can't even put a finger on what is unpleasant to them. Like if you look at like a guy like Junji Ito, right? Like that guy, you know, he's the guy who makes like Uzumaki. He's the guy who like tries to draw things that unsettle him, right? And he tries to make horror movies that would possibly unsettle or even scare even himself, right? And so it's like you've got to have intentions. You've got to have a firm grasp on your own emotional state when you're drawing. And so it's like these are these multiple dimensions, and I think people tend to get very caught up, and I know that people want to focus and needle in on things, but sometimes you also need to have eyes in every direction and understand that learning is not all just about, you know, trying to transfer knowledge. It's not, you can't just brainwave transplant into somebody and expect them to turn out well. I mean, because they're not robots. They won't carry out your instructions perfectly. I think it's prone to mutation. People are prone to mutation. And I don't mean in the biological sense. I mean in the informational sense. When you tell people how to do one thing or do another and you give them instructions, it's like they're prone to mutation. Things will change and be different. And so I think that's probably one of the reasons why, you know, why we're able to invent things, is because if you want to invent things, you got to look at some way to make something else. Well, if you look at the way things are currently, you have to find a way to make that thing obsolete. And so you want to make something that's better, and you have to look for the shortcomings in a thing, and maybe you might have a different point of view on it. Your experiences are maybe different. Like a person who, like I say, I'm a computer programmer, so when I approach drawing, the reason my approach is so different is because I'm like supposedly the opposite of an artsy fartsy art guy, right? So I have a very different point of view on it. I originally had a very regimented and structured approach, but now I've actually kind of come around and become a lot more instinctual. So I guess when it came to the hard skills, and by hard I mean like the technical skills, I took a very regimented approach, a very structured and methodical approach. But then when it came to the aesthetic side, it's like, no, I had to learn, how to come at things from a more instinctual side. So anyway, getting late. Video's getting long. See you guys later.